All in all, per year, you're looking at 36k.
But actually what I realise is it goes back to the core of what the company's about.
If you saw that room, 12,000 people, you'd be like, fuck, that's a lot of people.
And we're now in a new era of media.
I don't think we've ever had a situation where somebody's listened to a show and gone, bloody hell, you're the architects for me. Welcome to another little short urban forecast with Jon and I. We are today talking about what is the point of doing a podcast. So it's a bit meta, but we think it's useful to kind of frame why we, week after week, sit here recording ourselves and feeling slightly awkward and having to redo things when we mess things up. But just worth stating, I suppose, the level of investment that it requires to do a weekly podcast. So excluding our time, you've got to buy the hardware. So it's about £3,000 for the 3 cameras, £2,000 for the laptop, mics, lights, mixer, add up to about £500. Probably should invest more in some of this stuff, and we will over time. But then it's really the editing, distribution, and hosting which add up. So it's about another £3,000 a month. So all in all, per year, you're looking at 36k plus the kind of the fixed costs of another kind of 5k. So it is a decent investment. You know, that 36k is a staff member, you know, the junior staff member. So you could have another sort of part 1, part 2. But no, instead we decide to sit here, and you know, it obviously takes quite a lot of time with the directors of the company. We're sort of taking ourselves out of the business to do this, but we do think there are real benefits to doing it. So, Jon, do you want to take us through some of those?
Well, I think, you know, going back to the origins of why we wanted to do the podcast, I think you first came to me and had an idea, and I was worried it might just be a bit of kind of navel-gazing or talking about ourselves. But actually what I realised is it goes back to the core of what the company's about. And when you kind of talk to some interesting people, for example, Alex Ely, he talks a lot about the kind of purpose and vision of his company. And for us, it was very much about building a company that was more than just turning over architecture and buildings. It was about kind of the future of cities. And like, as an architect, how do you genuinely influence that? You have a small amount of influence on each project, but actually it's about joining together with other people, building a network, connecting. And I think for us, this was an opportunity to reach out to different people where you might not have an immediate project connection on, but actually to have a conversation about the big issues of the day. Yeah,
I think it's that, you know, we've always wanted, we were, you know, a small practice, now we're a medium-sized practice, but we always wanted to punch above our weight. That was kind of our like mantra. And I think the podcast gives us the opportunity to, rather than following the conversation, actually kind of lead the conversation. And we always wanted, you know, like, how do you, what is thought leadership? How do you create thought leadership? Well, we do it through a lot of different ways. So LinkedIn, going to events, but this is a really good way of solidifying our thoughts and, you know, projecting it to the world and saying, you know, this is actually what we think about things, and that kind of is thought leadership. And I think that, you know, we get to pick the topics that we want to talk about as well. So it's, you know, it's self-indulgent, I suppose, in some ways, but not because we want to publicize ourselves. It's more like, what's the thing we really want to talk about? Like, you know, the one that we talked about, Guy Vince, about the age of Anthropocene, that the humans sort of destroying the planet. That was slightly unpleasant listening, but you know, it is a fascinating person to get on the podcast and listen to.
Totally. And I think we've had everyone from kind of activists, authors to politicians. And I think, you know, in my story, Ollie will get bored of hearing this, but you know, I walked into Richard Rogers' offices, you know, whatever it was, 35 years ago, and asked for a job and got one. And he was a real inspiration to me, and I looked at the way he had a massive PR team when I worked there that all went out and talked to the papers, and he went and met politicians and built relationships and built and worked with the Labour Party and, you know, other people. But he then made a huge impact on basically cities in general, but in London in particular. And so for me, that was always a role model of how you can actually be more than, he's a great designer as well and did many other things, but he also looked beyond that and how that you could create a bigger kind of thing. So in that day, it was more about papers, press and everything else. And we're now in a new era of media.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you know, a lot of the topics that we choose to talk about on this podcasts aren't just regeneration. We want to talk about the intersection between politics, regeneration, urbanism. Like, these are the kind of the big ideas, and it doesn't involve just people from architecture. It involves leaders. So Mete Koban, who's now the deputy mayor for London, for the environment. You know, what a great person to come onto the show. Or the chair of the planning committee of the City of London. You know, again, another really influential person, slightly outside of architecture, but that overlap between politics and the city is like so important. And I think, you know, this lets us kind of dabble in those topics, and you get that added benefit of the kind of the authority, you know, positioning yourself amongst those people, having that conversation as architects elevates you into that conversation. Rather than being a participant, you are sort of leading it.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, and I think it goes back to some of the themes that have been starting to come out recently with Alex Ely, with other Harry Phillips, other people, where there's real challenges in the profession. But for me, and I've been criticised by some people for saying this, I'll say it's not just about architects. Oh, we're not paid enough, we want more things. It's actually like, how do we make the process better? How do we make cities better? Of course we need to be paid as part of that and everything else, but rather than thinking as architects as a sort of individual profession that needs special protection on its own, it's more about how do we make the built environment better, and how do we become leaders within built environment to create better cities, better buildings, better client experiences, because it's very fragmented and difficult at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's good, you know, this gives us every week or so an hour to step back and try and like look at those challenges and kind of thread a needle through some of those topics that come up and go, actually, you know, this keeps coming up. You know, the Building Safety Act keeps coming up. The challenges around planning keeps coming up. The challenge around viability keeps coming up. And it, you know, through talking to people in different disciplines about the same topics, you get this unique perspective where you go, oh, fucking, you know, those kind of align actually. And there's like possibly one solution that might be able to kind of create multiple wins. And so we just, you know, this is our 10th year or 11th, depending on how you count it. And so we've just spent today doing our sort of 10-year, we had an original 10-year plan on a 1.5 meter long scrap of paper, completed that, tick. Did you get your time freedom?
Not yet.
So we've put time freedom back in the 10-year plan for the next 10 years. But we have been doing the 10-year plan today. And I think having had the podcast, all these really interesting people, it's our way of creating a manifesto. You know, these discussions are our manifesto.
They're a key part of it, and I think, you know, we've been talking about our official 10-year kind of anniversary later this year, and we're looking at how we can put that together in these different thought processes. And I think sometimes I have the feeling, I don't have time to do this. You know, there's so many things that need to be done, invoicing, projects, sales, whatever. But actually, having that time for reflection is actually part of your professional development, and actually trying to step up beyond the minimum required for delivering a project.
Do you think this is a CPD? Does this count as our CPD?
I think I put it down, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wittering on to Oli for 20 minutes
Well, not this bit, but the talking to important people about interesting subjects and researching it. So there is some research that goes in the background, sometimes more than others. And there is research that goes into the subjects and around that. And they're often subjects we already know something about. Yeah. And then it enhances, we do, as some people know, we do some breakfast clubs where we have round tables around those subjects and develop white papers. So there's kind of layers of kind of depth that come around it. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, another interesting way, so you've got the kind of, you know, this positioning and authority and thought leadership, but like just on a pure amplification basis, you know, if you were speaking to a room with 12,000 people in it, you'd be like, that is a lot of people. That's a Division 1 stadium when full. If you saw that room, 12,000 people, you'd be like, fuck, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Across all the different platforms, these full episodes are listened to 1,000 times a month. So that means over a year, you're getting 12,000 people listening to us for between 20 minutes and an hour, depending on the length of the episode. That's quite a lot of people. So that sort of amplification is not anything that you could recreate through another mechanism, right? You know, you're not going to get people, I can't even do the maths, but thousands of hours of people listening to our voices and our nonsense ideas or good ideas. There's not another medium, I don't think, where you could do that.
The print media is what used to be, right? You get a big double page article in The Guardian or in The Times or something, and that's where you get a kind of...
But I don't think you get the granularity of thought in that, because so one of the points that Ash, the guy that edits, or sort of, he doesn't edit this, produces our podcast for us, is podcast audiences are very affluent audiences compared to the rest of the media, because it's something that you have in the background. You can pop it on, you have your favorited shows, and you're doing your thing, you're exercising in the gym, you're driving, whatever. Your shows that you like they automatically come on, and you don't tend to skip through them. You just go whatever, the next one of like, for me, it's like whatever, Diary of a CEO and some of the other urban forecasts I do listen to. It just comes on, and so you get like it's a highly affluent audience they've been very selective about the shows that they follow. So for us, the quantity of people actually is not the relevant thing. It's making sure we get the right people and that they listen to a whole episode to get the real clarity of thought. And I think that's a better, there's a much more detailed way of getting to know somebody than a double page spread in a newspaper. I don't feel like you know the person.
I mean, it is, I mean, it's the new world though, isn't it? In the like, there is a more of a personal branding thing going into it, and how people want to kind of understand how you tick and whatever. So I think there is that. I mean, I think from you probably, and just the way me and you are, I think there's you're, and I not that I don't see the benefit, but there is this sort of sales amplification power that's really, really there. Whereas like I see it as this sort of idea network, and it's sort of the same thing. It's the same thing described in slightly different ways of how we can kind of enhance our knowledge base to create kind of a better vision.
You're enhancing your knowledge, but you're also then distributing that knowledge.
Correct.
Because I don't think, one of the things that I don't think the podcast is like a direct sales tool. I don't think we've ever had a situation where somebody's listened to a show and gone, bloody hell, you're the architects for me, right? It's much more gradual. It's a touch point. And I think there's a hidden benefit in terms of our sales funnel is actually getting people on the show as guests. So our sales funnel, from the kind of initial point of like recognition that there is a company called Ackroyd Lowry, so that initial touch point, we will take them on a kind of journey, a nurture process through to the point where they become a paying client. And actually getting them on as a guest is a really useful step in that journey. There's plenty of people that we've gotten on as a guest and then they've become clients. And so that's a sort of like, rather than somebody listening to the show and then using us as architects, they can become a guest. Yeah. Well, but it also, as another touch point, I've sent people episodes, like where we've done an episode with Colin Wilson, and then somebody's doing a scheme in Southwark, and go, oh, I've actually done a podcast with Colin, and he's,
it's drawing that connection, it's drawing that ecosystem of people and bringing them together in like different ways. And I think then transmitting that as a kind of piece of content. Yeah.
The last point is it's quite fun. It's nice to step outside of the day-to-day drudgery of architecture.
It is, it is. And I think in reality, me and you don't get to meet that often. And then when it is, it's then quite kind of operational, or like it can be strategic, but it doesn't like step into that higher kind of thing. And we talked about trying to build a business, that builds the city of the future. And actually, you're quite down in the machine sometimes. Mm-hmm. And actually, you need sometimes to step up into the vision, into the thing, and talk to people about something more. And this gives us a format to do that. And I think that's a very powerful thing for me.
Well, thank you very much. That's a good way to end it.
Thanks, Ollie.
Cheers.